So just as a reminder, this week's question is faith and science. Can we have faith and believe in science? And do science and the Bible conflict? Right? That there are various perspectives and views on this. So to start, Pastor Marina lent us this book called The Hand of God, Thoughts and Images Reflecting the Spirit of the Universe. And so I will let folks look at this. But there are amazing pictures. It looks like from space. Yeah, that's what I think. So all of this beauty that exists in the universe. So it's really pretty cool. So that this is a book that also reinforces that science and God are not in conflict, that God is an amazing creator and has created beauty throughout the universe. So Lhasa, let's start with you. You brought this up and you said you had been at a meeting where folks were talking about how they could be Christian and believe in science at the same time. Do you want to share any more with us about that?
It's not so much to share, but it is a Christian science group in Washington, D.C., and they have formal meetings, and they try to come up with reflections, articles, speeches, meetings, especially among young people in schools, because we have all these movies from Hollywood with Big Bang and all these kind of things, and young kids get very confused. They think that they cannot believe in God and also the science. So I think this is a very important group of people who really knows what they are talking about, and that they are willing to spend their time going out and talking to young people and say that, well, they basically say the same thing as I have figured out during my 73 years, that the only difference between Hollywood and me is that they believe that everything is explained by science, and I believe that science is just a documentation of what God has done. So that's basically the long story short.
Like that. Okay. Thanks, Lhasa. That's great. That's a great way to start off. How about anybody else want to weigh in on kind of what you've found or what you've heard about science and faith in the Bible and that kind of thing?
I think you can believe in both, because if the Bible said that God created in 7 days, a day of his is not a day of ours. So who knows how long it took to get to a humanoid. So I believe that you can do stuff like that, and we're still evolving. So I believe you can believe in both.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, Marianne. So could you guys hear Marianne about, God's day might be a much longer than what we think of as a day. Yeah.
Not an Earth day.
Right. That those aren't in conflict. Yeah. Anybody else?
I guess I don't see a one or the other decision. But since science seems so definite and provable, I tend to bend the faith to fit the science rather than bending the science to fit the faith. Does that make any sense?
Yes. Well, and I think it's beautiful that in science there's still mysteries too.
I don't think it explains everything, or at least we haven't found the explanation yet. But science says, well, this is the way it happened. Okay. So you just move the faith description a little bit to the right or left or whatever, and it still fits together.
Still fits.
Yep. Dee, did you have something?
Not really.
I thought that I had heard something, and when I turned my head, I thought that it had popped up as you, but
Oh,
I'm
no.
not trying to put you on the spot. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think for a long time, I also have had the sense that that, as Marianne, as you said, I mean, there wasn't someone with a stopwatch on those days of creation saying, well, 24 hours is over, like time for a new day to begin.
Tigers in 2 minutes,
Right.
lions in 3.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, go ahead.
And I was gonna say, and they're still discovering various forms of humanoid people
Yeah.
that are even older than they originally thought. So science is constantly changing where faith
Yeah.
is a little more.
And I don't
constant.
see evolution as any problem.
Yeah.
It started here and it kept on moving until here we are.
Right.
Yeah. And that timeline keeps getting set further and further
Longer and
back.
longer.
Right.
Now, as more and more things are
Discoveries.
discovered.
Yeah.
So
I think that is so cool that, science keeps looking, right?
Mhm.
So like you said, there are humans that are found that are from way before people thought that people existed.
But aren't we going back to last week's discussion about, I don't know if it was last week, the literal or the figurative reading and who wrote it and how was it translated?
Yeah.
And if you're stuck with one of those interpretations, then I can see why this is a problem.
I think that is a great segue. I've looked at a couple places to find additional stuff for us, in our exploration of this question. And one of the places that I found was the ELCA actually has a whole webpage on faith and science, which is way cool. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I think I shared maybe last week, maybe before that, I have this book, Making Sense of the Bible, Rediscovering the Power of Scripture Today. And lo and behold, there is a discussion in here of science, the Bible, and creation stories. Oops, I forgot to unlock the door. We almost locked Stephanie in.
I could have gotten my key, but
So I think Louise was.
sorry.
But I really like the way you put it, that trying to put science into the religion, the Christianity, instead of trying to put Christianity into science. I really like that, because that's the way I do it as well. That my belief is stronger than anything else, and I just try to place science people into my belief instead of the opposite.
Yeah. Move us back to see if I can't get all of us at the same time.
Hi, Stephanie.
Good morning. Morning, Dee and Lynn.
Good morning.
So we have this book, Making Sense of the Bible, and there's a whole chapter on science, the Bible, and creation stories. Let's begin our exploration of the questions people ask about the Bible with the biblical story that is the center of the conflict between science and religion, the creation story. We've already so the book already touched on the story before, but I'd like to address a question I was asked not long ago by a biology student. In biology, I'm learning that the Earth is billions of years old, that life evolved from the most primitive elements to what it is today. How can I reconcile that with what I read in Genesis chapters 1 and 2? So I think that what you just raised, Louise, feeds directly into this. And so the author goes on to say, several years ago, I showed up as a visitor to a gathering of young Earth creationists, which I think Stephanie brought up last week. So I came just to listen and to better understand what motivated this group of Christians to insist that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old and that it was created in 6 literal days, pretty much as Genesis 1 describes it. The participants were sincere and passionate about their beliefs regarding creation. They described the reasons they rejected carbon-14 dating, offered explanations for scientific data typically used to demonstrate the Earth is much, much older than what they accept, and described the underlying convictions that led them to believe in a young Earth. They believe that God created the Earth in a day, then the atmosphere on a second day. Dry land and plant life were created on the third day, the sun and moon on the fourth day, fish and birds on the fifth day, all other animals, and finally the first two human beings were created on the sixth day. They believe creation happened in this way because this is what Genesis 1 teaches. And they believe it happened roughly 6,000 years ago because they added up the lifespans of the descendants of Adam as they were listed in Genesis and found, using this math, that Adam and Eve were created around 6,000 years ago.
So that means they're assuming a certain lifespan.
Absolutely. Yes. So it says these sincere Christians believe this because, as several of them said at the gathering, Genesis is the, quote, eyewitness account of creation. Asked what they meant by this, they said, quote, God was the only one present in creation. Only he truly knows what happened. The Bible is his word. He inspired Moses to write these things. They are a trustworthy and reliable account of what happened, for God does not lie. The view they articulated about the Bible was verbal plenary inspiration. And the implication of this is inerrancy. The biblical account is, quote, totally true and trustworthy, regardless of what it is teaching about, including science. A further implication of this view is that if modern science conflicts with the Genesis account of creation, modern science must be wrong. So yeah, I think you got right to it, Louise, that, you know, if we are beholden that this is all literal, then it leads us in a very different direction than if we see that there's a lot more to it. And what the author goes on to point out is that there's two creation stories, not just one, right? So the one goes the literal, those 7 days, but then the second version, it creates people, it creates man and animals and then woman later. So it has a very different order to it. So like, which one is right? The author says.
And the basis of the part of that problem is the phrase, God created man in his own image. So God looks just like us, right? Because we're in his image.
Because we're all like
I
that.
think so.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I look like a bone, a rib bone.
So I highlighted, this is the part of this chapter that I really love. The tragedy of a literal or creationist reading of the Bible is that it sets up a false dichotomy. One must choose between science and God. But this dichotomy only exists when one insists upon a literal approach to scripture or believes that the Bible's account of creation, as well as the flood, is God's account of precisely how and how long ago God created the world and everything in it.
I just have a hard time understanding why anybody reads it literally.
Yeah.
It was written by man, not God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
God didn't write the Bible in the words that we're reading.
Yeah. So let's just take a minute and talk about that. Why do you think people would want to read the Bible literally?
Simplifies things.
It does. It
Makes life easy.
it does, right? Because then there's little wiggle room.
There's
Bible says it.
no gray area.
Therefore, it is.
And yet, do you think biblical literalists really take the whole Bible literally?
No, only the part they want to.
Yeah. Because there's conflicting stuff in there, right? So if you want to take it all literally, it's going to get you into a corner time and time again.
And if you don't take it literally, then you're open to, well, are you really faithful? Do you really believe?
And the ages of people differ. Because in one place, somebody lived to 117, in other places, they lived to 400.
Right.
So
Yeah.
calculations are a little wonky.
Right.
Being a bookkeeper, you would notice those.
The numbers don't always add up.
The numbers don't add.
And they said it wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in one place, somebody's having a baby at 80,
Right.
and another place,
13.
person's
Yeah.
13 or 14, and it's like, Okay,
And we don't really know exactly how old Sarah was. You know, she was old.
Right.
But is that 90? Is it 60? Is it?
Right.
40.
I mean, yeah. 40,
In those
40
days,
and
30 was old.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you guys bring up a good point too, right? When we're reading the Bible literally, we're also unconsciously applying today's sort of measures to a Bible that was written thousands of years ago.
Right.
That things aren't the same.
And maybe people did live to be 800. Yeah, doubtful.
Well,
Could have.
and what-
Possible.
But I think that if the Bible had been written by women, we would have had a very different Bible.
Amen.
either written or edited, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
Yeah.
we talked about it last week, and it is influenced by men in different culture, and the English probably changed a lot from the original Bible.
so part of what I'm hearing, right, is part of the thing about is there a conflict between faith and science is really about how do you read the Bible and how do we understand God speaking to us, right? So then the ELCA has put out, and I need just a couple of copies of these things, but so one tiny step back. The ELCA puts out what's called social statements on a whole variety of topics. And it is the ELCA's way of engaging theological scholars along with lay people to think about challenges today. So one of the social statements that the ELCA put out was on genetics. And it talks about how God is a creating God and continues to create. So I brought a couple copies of the executive summary of the statement on genetics from 2010. But then like I said, I found that the ELCA has a whole webpage dedicated to faith and science. And on that, there is a document called Ask a Scientist, Questions and Answers About Faith and Science. And some of these are super interesting. But the very first question is, what is the ELCA official position concerning the origin of life and evolution? And so the answer says this: the ELCA has not officially taken a position about evolution, but the ELCA teaches that the scriptures witness that all life is a gift of God. However, the scriptures do not say, for example, how God's creating word, quote, let there be, brings creatures into being. Lutheran tradition has respected the work of the natural sciences in investigating phenomena in the natural world and explaining how they work and how they originated. Because our knowledge both of God and of other things is partial, what is accepted at any one time as valid scientific knowledge and theory can either be added to or corrected by further scientific investigation, which we talked about already this morning, and better theories to explain the phenomena we see in the world. Because we know that scientific knowledge continues to evolve. I mean, think about all of the things that have come.
We didn't have DNA analysis 20 years,
I know.
30 years ago. And yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and now there's medicine, right? That's specifically for particular DNA.
Sickle cell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing that science continues to evolve. So there are a number of questions in here that I think are super interesting. And I can certainly email this document to everyone if you're interested. But
Yes.
I mean, the questions are
Yes,
things.
please.
Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead.
please. Yeah, yes,
Okay.
please. Yeah.
I will. So questions like, what is ELCA's position on early stem cell research? And free will versus determinism. Is there any scientific proof of determinism?
That's the interesting one to me.
And it's,
And it goes on.
it is the longest answer. It is absolutely the longest
Midway.
answer. And what did I highlight?
And most of them say we have no official position, and then goes on to discuss it.
Yeah, which, so I think one of the things that the ELCA has understood, right, is having an official position, is not wise on a lot of these things, right? Because these are not black and white, like either this is right or that is right.
And it would also separate us again.
Right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah, we're
Uh,
trying to
and
solve
that's
problems,
very-
not create new ones.
And that's very, very important because every time we take a formal statement, we divide people and we grow in different directions. So it's very important. One of the questions I struggle with, Deacon, is what do my God, want me to do with some of this new thing from the science? Is it right? Is it God's will that we discover new things and new way of doing things, or should I be against it?
That's free will and determinism, and that's the long one here.
Yeah. And that's something I struggle with every time I read a new report. I mean, is it right to do all this stem cell research
Right.
and artificial intelligence and all these big things coming? Shall we work against it or should we adopt it? Is it God's will or is it against God's will?
Right, right. I generally take the approach that God gave us the intellect and invited us to be co-creators with God, that encourages this, finding new things and identifying new ways of doing things. And I think it goes back to what we talked about with, with the abuse of power, right? That there's all kinds of things that science can come up with that do not benefit human beings, right? That push to the extreme, things can be harmful. And so we always have to be looking at where is love in this, right? Who are the most vulnerable and how are they being treated and protected? And yeah, I don't think that we have all the answers. So it's a constant sort of, so AI, I think is one of those great examples, right? So maybe we can pick up the conversation next week with AI and what do we do with that? Because we don't really have answers. On one hand, there are simple uses of it that make things much easier. So like one of my new classes, the instructor said, feel free to use ChatGPT to do some of this stuff. He said, don't use it to do your papers. Because he said, what they've discovered is sometimes the AI tools make up stuff. So he says, don't do that. But what he said was, if you ask ChatGPT to do an outline of the book of Mark, for example, it will come up with a perfectly good outline. And so he said, you can use the tool to do some things that would
Long time to do.
Yeah. So I, like you, Lassa, I was so surprised when he said, yeah, it's ChatGPT, you should look at this. And I think, whoa, okay. But then, pushed to the extreme, yeah, that same tool can be used for plagiarizing or,
And it has been used for plagiarism. And that's how it's been developed, is by illegally copying tons of material from other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I was still teaching high school, and I had really bright kids who were all college bound and so on, which meant that they had more ability to figure out how to get around the corners.
Right.
But all you had to do was take a sentence or even a phrase that was questionable. It didn't sound like the way the kid normally speaks or writes.
Yeah.
Put it in the computer and it came out with the source. So this
Yeah.
is taking it to the next level.
Yeah.
I mean, it was easy enough to figure it out who was plagiarizing then.
But it'll get more complicated.
It is much
with
more complicated.
But there's also now tools that can be run against
Papers.
all papers,
Yeah.
right, to identify those
Yeah.
things. So, it's
Combination
AI
mile
can be
and
used.
half.
Yeah, the last class I took, they had a statement saying that all papers would be run through. I
Yeah.
forget the name of the software
Right,
for plagiarism and
Right.
incorrect cited
Right.
citations.
Yeah.
right.
And the scary thing is that students and other people, journalists and press, are using these tools now to go after politicians. So here in Norway, we have had 2 ministers of the parliament or the government been fired because they copied other masterworks into their master
When they were in college, yeah.
So it's
when
not
they
just
were in
here.
university or college. And one of them was even the head of education and had a court case against one of the students, and they discovered that she had copied other masters into her masters. So we have had a big political debate here in Norway now about using these tools, and 2 ministers had to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And that really, I mean, it strikes me as we're having this conversation that what we really start to get into is ethics, right? And that the people who are being caught out by the use of these tools now to find out that they plagiarized back then, I mean, their actions weren't right then, but they didn't get caught. Right. Right. I
Exactly.
mean, it's never been right to plagiarize. So now it's just easier to catch it.
So are we gonna put a time limit on what's legal and what wasn't,
Right.
I have a funny picture, AI generated picture. You can put it up here. I hope it'll work. Where's the camera?
Come down a little bit.
Down a little.
A little bit
Up a
lower,
little.
little
So you
bit
can
higher.
see,
Ah,
There we are. Yeah,
can you see it?
yeah.
It's so
And
funny.
that's
Oh,
probably
That's
right,
AI
right.
generated.
Right.
It looks so real.
right.
yeah. And it is so scary, and it's definitely not ethical. And that's when I get into God's will here.
Yeah.
What should be my position as a Christian towards all these new tools?
Yep. So I think that's a great question to explore further next week. It's 9:37. So let's talk more about that next week. We'll talk about AI, and we'll dip our toe into the water of ethics. Because I think that's really what we're talking about. It's not just the tool, but how do I figure out where I should stand, right?
Yep.
All right.
Good.
Well, another good discussion. Thank you, everyone. This is
Thank you.
great.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Deacon, for giving us this opportunity in a Sunday morning.
Well, it's good to be able to have these conversations. So, all right.
Excellent.
Well, so now I'll turn it back. Well, you have it. This is your meeting. I'll stop the recording